Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
Take my tips and pay me below minimum wage. See what happens. So this all happened years ago when I was still in college. I worked for a delivery joint. The company seemed super cool because they provided vehicles instead of forcing you to beat down your own car. Huge perk, right? Well, in this case, no. The owner of the company used this as justification to take a percentage of the driver's tips. Often this would result in an employee making below minimum wage. If you made below minimum wage, you would have to come and pick up your check in person and sign a document attesting that you did make minimum wage due to undocumented cash tips or some such nonsense. Now this was a problem for two reasons. Number one, in the state I was in, employee tips belonged to the employee unless part of an employee tip pooling agreement. This was plain as day on the Department of Labor website. So that 20% gouge was already crossing a line. Number two, you cannot just hand wave or force employees to say they made above minimum wage. So pretty shady crap, right? Now most people would see this situation and run for the hills, which probably explained the delivery driver turnover being so high. I, on the other hand, saw the potential. See, I am pretty well versed in labor law and decided that I was gonna ride it out. I wanted to see how long they would keep this crap up. Here and there I would make comments to the managers about the legality of their practices, and was often told, "Our lawyers said it's okay, so it's okay. Would love to meet these lawyers one day." So I patiently waited for a year, documenting every red cent they took from me and encouraging the other drivers to do so. Every new driver that came through that door got a little powwow with me, and I would give them the skinny. Unfortunately, my plan must have leaked because sooner than later the joint decided to fire me after making up 3 bogus infractions. If you're interested in those, ask and I'll explain in an edit. This wasn't a problem though, as my plan was already in action. See, in this state, unpaid wages collect interest. So what was $20 to $40 a night, 5 nights a week, over 1 year, quickly became a decent sum. So I began collecting the names of current and previous employees whom had been screwed over by the company and collected their documented data, then sent it off to the Department of Labor. At the end of the day it took a couple months, but the company was eventually required to pay a decent chunk of change to all parties and a pretty hefty fine on top. Overall I believe it came out to a little under $100K. I wasn't done though. See, those shady little documents they had us sign claiming we made over minimum wage affected how the company was reporting its payroll tax. The IRS eventually came in and hit them for a ton of back taxes, and I received a small portion of the settlement the IRS used to pay people who tipped them off. Don't know if they still do. Finally, I was increasingly aware of the company's under-the-table agreement with their health inspector, which I decided to go ahead and tip off to the health department. This resulted in even more fines and a temporary closure for the joint. Altogether it ended up costing this dumb little delivery joint a ton of money just to stay open, all because they wanted 20% of their drivers' tips. The moral here is this. Know your labor laws. It's degenerates like these whom profit off the ignorance or fear of a workforce. The more you know about your rights, the less idiots like these will be able to survive in the wild. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Edit 1, to address a few things. The infractions that led to my termination and their BS nature are down in the comments, hopefully they are not buried. I also wanted to address something I saw in the comments quite a bit. If you are in a situation that does not seem right, document everything. Keep a little black notebook, and write down everything. The most important thing you can do to protect yourself from nonsense in the workplace is document, document, document. If you are ever in question of something, be it disability rights at work or earnings, you can always contact your state EEOC branch or DOL branch. They will gladly help you figure out what is and isn't proper. Don't be a person who gets taken advantage of by bad employers. Only by fighting back will they ever learn their lesson. Next one is titled, Brutal Bus Driver Busted. After reading Yoilova 3173's post a couple of days ago below about hair pulling, it reminded me of something that happened way back in 1970 when I was in the first grade. First grade was the year I started taking the bus to school, and I had to walk several houses to the bus stop where several kids would meet up and catch the bus to school. On the first day, my mum accompanied me until I got on the bus, waved goodbye as I boarded and found a seat. As soon as the bus got out of sight, the bus driver stopped the bus and proceeded to walk down the aisle looking at each new kid with a scowl until he got to me. Since it was the 70s and being the in fad, I had longer than usual hair for a boy, just past my ears, wavy, down to my collar. I was the perfect target for the bus driver, who proceeded to grab my hair and literally pick me up off the seat by it, then proceeded to hit me on the side of my head with the back of his other very bony knuckled hand until I screamed, then started crying. It hurt so much. He dumped me back in my seat and told all of the other kids on the bus that this would happen to them if we didn't sit perfectly still and perfectly quiet until we got to school. Needless to say, we all sat that way in absolute terror, because over the course of a month or so the bus driver brutalized several kids that way for even the slightest infraction. Not knowing any better, I never said anything to my mum or dad, thinking this was standard practice with all bus drivers. One day a new kid that had just moved into the neighborhood got on the bus, and the bus driver grabbed their hair and beat him with the back of his other hand simply because the kid was new and need to be taught his lesson about bus rules. In school at lunch week, several of the kids that rode the same bus together told him the bus driver's rules and explained the punishment in hopes the new kid wouldn't be any further brutalized by the bus driver. The next day the kid got on the bus and very quickly and quietly took his seat. The bus pulled out from the bus stop and went maybe 100 feet when the siren from a police car right behind the bus started wailing. The bus driver pulled over, and the biggest, most massively muscular police officer I've ever seen to this day walked up alongside the bus and stood by the door and looked intently at the front tire of the bus. This police officer could have easily played frisbee with a manhole cover if he wanted to, he was so big. He then motioned to the bus driver to come out and take a look at the front tire, which the bus driver did. The officer looked at the bus driver and said, "Take a look at that tire and the lower lug nut, there's something wrong with it." The bus driver bent down to take a closer look, and the police officer grabbed the bus driver by the hair, lifted him with one arm completely off the ground and proceeded to beat the driver with his billy club until the bus driver was screaming. The officer then dropped him in a heap on the ground and then continued hitting the bus driver until he was nearly unconscious and no longer fighting to defend himself. The police officer explained to the bus driver that if he even so much as touched another kid again for any reason, he would come back and do it again, but not stop until the bus driver had suffered severe brain damage. Every kid on the bus to a T cheered afterwards, and the new kid had a beaming smile from ear to ear on his face as he pointed at the police officer and said with great enthusiasm, "That's my dad." The bus driver slowly got up, got back on the bus, and drove us the rest of the way to school bleeding from several places on his body and head, and never said a thing. We never saw that bus driver after that day. He must have quit immediately. This was one of the few great days out of the hell that was my elementary education, and one I'll never forget. Next one is titled, Tyrant Cotenants. So we were living in NY. Old Victorian-type homes were divided into apartments. The old house in question was divided into 3 parts. We had the upstairs, the troublemaker had the majority of the ground floor. And a third tenant had a small studio to the side of the first floor. The problem, a tyrant of a woman, like I said, had the first floor. She lived there with her husband. He took care of the property, which meant he mowed the lawn, but was a lush, cheap Scotch. They had been there the longest, so they knew the landlord best. They acted like owners, not renters, always in our business. There was a single driveway. It took 2 cars, hers and her husband's. During the winter, everyone else had to park at the bottom of a hill at the train station. She worked at the bottom of the hill for the village we lived in. During the cold, snowy winter months, she would drive down the hill and park at train station and walk 20 yards to work. She could have easily just walked down the hill to work, but had to drive, because she was special. The woman in the studio apartment was on oxygen and couldn't walk down the hill. Her husband had to go down, get their car, and then pick her up, and then in reverse when they got home. When my wife was pregnant, she always had to walk down the hill. No way Her Highness was giving up either of her parking spots. One time I parked in the driveway for a few minutes to collect my wife and kids when the tyrant showed up. She starts honking her horn because we were on her side of the driveway and she wouldn't park on her husband's side. I decide to ignore her. So she calls the cops. Remember, she works for the village. She and I, have a few words. The neighbors are amused. After a while, Barney shows up. And he asks me to move, from a private driveway. So I do. Monday morning, I call Barney's boss, a legitimate cop, not like Hick Barney. I asked him if the village PD has jurisdiction over private driveways. He says no, so I tell him the story. A few minutes later the tyrant gets home and starts screaming at me from the bottom of the stairs. It seems she got suspended. Barney too. But that's not the revenge. We moved out the following winter. Early January. This house had a basement, and it was cold down there. I knew the layout of their apartment. And I got some frozen fish. Placed it in the basement rafters under their bedroom. We were long gone by the spring thaw, but I hope they enjoyed the smell of rotting fish. Next one is titled, How I Made My Neighbor Leave Me Alone. I was recently reminded of a petty revenge I enacted about 10 years ago. At the time I lived in an apartment with my wife and 2 tiny kiddos. The way the apartment was configured, my front door faced my neighbor's front door. This apparently inspired their approximately 10-year-old daughter to spend her days messing with us. Some of her greatest include but are not limited to 1. Throwing rocks at my door and closing her door as a type of doorbell ditching, I suppose. 2. Putting empty boxes by my door, knocking, and closing her door. The boxes had her address and apt number, real smart. 3. Being noisy and banging on our shared walls. These were near daily occurrences. Being young, and this being my first apartment, I didn't want problems with my neighbors, so I just put up with it. My apartment manager didn't care enough to get involved. Even if I had reported it, I went over a month without hot water because she didn't care to get it fixed. The kids' parents never seemed to be around. They might have worked nights, not sure, but either way I couldn't talk to them. I put up with all the shenanigans for quite a while, until one day I noticed my van had been scratched, and not accidentally. Childlike handwriting, shallowly scratched into my door that said something like, "You're gonna die." Now I'm angry. One thing you need to know is the neighbor's window is always open. Always. Every time I walk by I can hear USA Channel playing NCIS repeats. I also know the little girl spies on us through that window. So me and my wife share a knowing head nod towards the open window and proceed to talk loudly about how the little girl is always messing with us, and she probably keyed our car and how we should call the cops on her. Not 20 minutes later she knocks on our door and apologizes for messing with us and says she will leave us alone. We tell her we appreciate her apologizing, and that all is forgiven. She never messes with us again. Next one is titled, Think You Can Treat Us Like Garbage Because You're a Customer? Get out of our store. It's about freaking time that someone stood up to the customer, you know? I used to work as a reluctant supervisor at a Seattle's Best Coffee, the kind that was attached to Borders back in the day. Although we were connected to the bookstore, we were definitely our own entity, something that the Borders management was quick to remind me of all the time. One of our customers, who we called Silvers, was a certified nutball. She came in almost every day and spent hours sitting in the cafe writing on scrap pieces of paper and talking to herself and drinking cup after cup of coffee. She ate lunch with us almost every day, too, which I never understood, because our sandwiches were basically soggy pieces of bread with meat on them. Because she was there all the time, we were also privy to her crazy conspiracy theories. In our communications logbook, we referred to her ramblings as the Silvers Saga. Among her more notable pieces of conversation, Oprah stole her idea for a magazine, Jennifer Aniston stole her haircut, her ex-man was drugging her, we suspect that he was making her take her medication, sandals were a conspiracy so that people could hurt your feet and blame it on you, the Pope was part of the Illuminati, witches had cursed her, etc. Like I said, crazy. As part of her insanity, she also used to regularly call corporate and make false accusations against us. 2 or 3 times a day, she would use our payphone. I really wanted to rip that thing out of the wall, to complain that we were putting poison in her food and her coffee. She would act all nice to your face and then 3 minutes later would be on that damned phone telling someone that her coffee smelled like arsenic and she was probably going to die and she wanted us all fired. And then she would come back the next day and do it all again. Everyone in the corporate office knew who she was and completely disregarded whatever she said. When I tried to get her banned from the store, I was informed that I didn't have the authority, only the boarders could do that. Since the bookstore management never had to deal with her, they weren't at all concerned about it. That is, until the day she complained and a new employee at corporate, who didn't know anything about this lunatic's ramblings, raked the boarder's HR manager, Bob, over the coals. There is a whole file on this woman. Why haven't you done anything about this? We are going to have to send someone to investigate because these are serious accusations. Your cafe staff's jobs are on the line. Your job is on the line. Well, now the management cared. Silvers was, as usual, sitting in the cafe eating a sandwich and drinking her coffee and pretending like she hadn't just called corporate to complain about us for the 100th time. With the woman on corporate still on the line, Bob marched over to Silvers and the following exchange happened. Bob, get up. Silvers, smiling, are you talking to me? Bob, yes, get up. Silvers, with a look of righteous smugness, I guess you're finally going to take me seriously now? Bob, yup. Get the duck out of my store. Now. Silvers, smile gone, what? Bob, what word didn't you understand? Get, duck, out, now. You are not welcome back here. No one wants to poison you, because no one gives a crap about you. No one. Get, out, now. And then my favorite part, Bob put the phone to his ear and asked the lady on the line, was that handled to your satisfaction? Coincidentally, after this incident, management was a lot more open to employee complaints concerning crazy customers. Last one is titled, Steal My Security Deposit? Your business is gone. I rented a little house from a man who owned a painting business. The power was off when we came to see the property, but he assured us everything worked, even put it in the contract. The place was dirty and poorly maintained, so we negotiated the security deposit down to $300. Turned out the heat/air didn't work, along with the refrigerator and dishwasher. I asked him to have someone look at them. He cursed me up and down. He called and left threatening voicemails. He would show up unannounced and let himself in. On one of the visits, I showed him that the crawlspace was flooded and was a breeding ground for thousands if not millions of cockroaches and mosquitoes that would come up through the floor vents. There was absolutely no ductwork even though he claimed the heat/air worked fine. He accused me of causing the flood myself even though I showed him the source was a pipe that had rusted through. He refused to address any problems and said, if you don't like it then you can move. You can't pay for a bargain and expect to live in the Ritz. This man was a terrible man in general. Once he hired someone off Craigslist to cut down a tree in the rental property's yard. The man worked literally all day for the agreed $150, cut up and hauled off the tree. He came back that evening, just standing in the yard. I asked if I could help him. He said he was waiting for the owner to get paid. The owner kept replying saying he was on the way but never showed up. Our neighbor told us he had punched the previous renter in the face and refused to pay him for a day's work for his company. He had bragged about renting to illegal immigrants and not having to do anything because they wouldn't sue. We had a newborn baby, so we called his bluff and agreed to find a new place to live. We left the home in much better shape than we found it. He said he would mail us the security deposit but never did. He dodged my phone calls until one day he called to say, you aren't getting it back. You broke the contract when you left early, so go duck yourself. I was really upset because we were new parents and had very little money. That $300 was a big deal to us and a drop in the bucket for this man. He owned an upscale painting business and had 15 rental properties. The next week, I was online leaving negative reviews for his business when I clicked a link and noticed his website's domain had just lapsed. I knew what I had to do. I immediately bought it, and then created a homepage with contact info for his biggest competitor. I emailed him from his old domain, asking him if he wanted to buy the website for $320, the cost of the security deposit plus the price I paid for the domain. He was irate. He started calling my work, threatening to sue my employer. He even contacted my parents and threatened to sue them. He left a bunch of threatening voicemails for me, saying he was going to beat me up and he knows where I live and he has my social security number. I received emails from several review sites asking if I was trying to update the contact info for the business. He must have used his old domain's email as his contact email. I didn't want to get in trouble for impersonating his business, so I did not respond. The contact info was never changed. I received a few emails from potential clients. I called him and told him about the painting job requests. I gave him the contact info for one of the clients to prove I wasn't just making it up. I told him it was the last time I was going to do that for him, and suggested he buy the website back in order to not miss out on any other jobs. He told me he was taking me to court. I told him I had recorded his threatening phone calls and saved all his texts and voicemails. He said he was going to sue me for illegally recording him, not illegal in my state. I said, I look forward to seeing you in court where I countersue you and press charges for harassing me, and I hung up. He called back and cussed me out for hanging up on him. I said, call me back when you can speak respectfully to me, and hung up again. We repeated this about 5 times, each time he was angrier until the last time. He spoke respectfully and explained he hadn't got a single job in months. I suggested he focus more on creating a website to find business. He lost it and cussed me out again. 6 months passed and he still hadn't bought the website from me. I get a call from him, begging me to do the right thing and give him the website back. I told him the current price was $350. 6 months later, I get another phone call. I told him the current price is $380. Eventually, he texted me to say, I went out of business. I hope you're happy. I responded, I hear having a website really helps your business. $380 and it's yours. He told me what a terrible person I am and said, karma's a witch. I responded, maybe if you stopped trying to rip people off, your karma wouldn't be so bad. That was the last time I ever heard from him. The major business listing sites confirmed his business did indeed close. I renewed the domain for another 2 years just in case he was bluffing. A few months later, I drove by his office to see if it was still there. It was empty with a "for rent" signposted. I never got that $300 back and spent money on domain registrations, but it was totally worth it. Thanks for listening.